Steve Laffey and I met a couple years ago at the Independence Institute Founders Night dinner. I heard his accent, which is a East Coast accent, and I almost told him to get the hell out of my state. But I listened to him for a little while longer, and it turns out that he was a former mayor of his hometown, in fact, Cranston, Rhode Island. And when he got into office, or the reason that he ran for office, was because they were so indebted that they needed to bring themselves out or they were going to be insolvent. So Steve took to the streets and persuaded people to vote for him. And then he took the initiative and that leadership to turn that city around from the lowest bond rating in America up to not the worst bond rating in America. Then he did a little bit more. He ran for Senate out there. And when that didn't work out, he took to the streets again and he made a movie about it. And so he went around America and he talked to normal, everyday people about what they thought was wrong with the country and how they would fix the country. I actually haven't seen the movie, but I'm just guessing that that's what it is. And Steve is going to tell us a little bit about that experience, what he learned out there, and he's going to talk about his experiences in Rhode Island also and tell us about his political perspective and hopefully challenge us to think in creative ways or to go out with that intellectual ammunition and change people's hearts and minds. So without further ado, Mr. Steve Laffey.
Thank you all. Thanks for coming. It's great to be with you tonight. It's the second time. Patrick Davis reminded me it's the second time I've been at this group. We were down in Colorado Springs a little while ago, about a year and a half ago, I guess it was, in speaking. Just a little bit about me. I am from Rhode Island. I'm here with half of my brood and my beautiful wife, Kelly. I got my three youngest ones here. Other three are studying for getting ready for finals. Two are at CSU. One is at Columbia University in New York. But I have 6 children, and really I came out here for them. I'm from Rhode Island. I had grown up a pretty poor kid, and my dad was a toolmaker. I was the only kid to go to college, one of these stories, and I went off to Harvard Business School and went to the financial field and ended up helping run a $500 million revenue publicly traded investment banking firm. I was the president, chief operating officer. We sold it at the peak of the NASDAQ market, which just got touched again here. I was in charge of the sale of the firm. I left and was going to start a hedge fund. And the short version is I ended up going back to where I grew up in Cranston, Rhode Island, and they had bankrupted this city about the size of Fort Collins without the students, I suppose you'd say. With a very strong mayor charter. It was a 9-0 Democratic city council, a Democratic mayor. In Rhode Island, it could have been a 9-0 Republican city council, Republican mayor. It didn't matter. The whole thing is just totally corrupt. People overspent by so much money you can't believe. They took all the money out of the pension plan they could to balance the budget. The bond rating went to the lowest in America. And the day I took office, the city had 27 days until we defaulted on our debt. And we were borrowing 3-month money at tax equivalent rates of 15%. And so that's sort of like, maybe people in Colorado don't get this joke, but Rhode Island they would. You know, when I say, I would walk around and say, hey, folks, that's like, this isn't normal, just so you know. This is like you lost like 6 football games in a row and a guy named Vinny came up with a baseball bat to get the money, right? Those are the kind of rates you pay. Everybody else is paying 2%, right? So the short version is I took on a lot of issues, won a lot of lawsuits. We had crossing guards that made $129 an hour. That could be a whole discussion about crossing guards who are unionized crossing guards. We won a giant lawsuit against them. It took years. It took really about 5 years. It took until I was out of office to finally win this case against unionized crossing guards and getting rid of them, and we did. So I ran for the U.S. Senate, and my heart since then has always sort of been on these federal problems, which are huge. And I am the only living or dead elected Republican, according to Craig Shirley, Reagan's biographer, to be attacked by the National Republican Party. When I ran for the Senate, thank you. The Washington establishment did not want me to run. They had a man named Lincoln Chafee, who became the Democratic governor of Rhode Island, but they not just backed him, they couldn't find anything nice to say about him, so they just attacked me. So in the widest turnout by a factor of 2, we lost a very narrow race. The book I wrote about it through Penguin Books is really not so much about the race, but about how the Republican Party is so off the rails, and how if they wanted to, they could get back. And it's a grassroots story that came out in 2007. But I came out to Colorado because I really just saw no future. There are some places in America that really aren't coming back. And I got a lot of kids. And so we had traveled the country in '08 for 3.5 months when that Stephen Jr. over there was 3 months. Imagine traveling the country for 3.5 months with no reservations around the United States of America. And it was just a life-changing experience, just hanging out with regular folks up in, Bozeman and, name the place, just gas stations. And I could tell you story after story about that. But out of that, came a couple of guys, when I moved out here, called me and said, listen, we want your help. And what I do sometimes is help I help people with bad financial problems, not people, companies. And they had this startup company. They wanted my expertise on this thing. And so they happened to be at the Sundance Film Festival, broadcasting. And so I flew out there to meet up with them rather than go to the East Coast again, because it's a lot closer. And that's when I just got it on my heart to make this movie that is here called Primary Mistake. It occurred to me then when I was at the Sundance Film Festival, and we spent about a year making this, but we traveled the country because in my heart, this country is in really, really bad shape. Like it's broke. It's not like, people running for president talking about we need 21st century jobs for 20 or whatever. A lot of people would be happy with 20th century jobs today, right? But all the platitudes and just ignoring the fact that we're literally down to like 5 to 7 years at best before this whole thing blows up. And everybody knows it. And that's the tragedy of sort of the commons of where we stand today, right? You're going to leave here and you know it. I know it. I don't know if he knows it, but they kind of know it. My older kids know it. And yet we just keep going down this straight line. And so the purpose, straight line over the cliff, and we now see the cliff. Like it's not 1979, is it? Things were pretty damn bad. And no one was like, oh, we're going to lose the country. It's just like, oh, this Jimmy Carter guy, he really doesn't get it. We'll get rid of him and we'll move on and so forth. And we did. But take a look back way. I'll just tell you, I'm looking at my second book that I might write. And it's really about both parties really screwing this up. That we really, and I'm a registered Republican, but think about it. Since 2001, we have a House of Representatives, we have a United States Senate, we have a president. And one of those two houses is controlled by one or two parties, right? Democrat, Republican. If you look at the beginning of 2001, when George Bush was the Republican president, Democrats controlled for a while both sides. Then Republicans controlled both sides. And then we had a Democratic president. But anyway, we've had 6 combinations of different types of people in control. Democrats, Republicans, or sometimes all Democrats in 8 and 9 and 10, I guess. And now we have Republicans control of both the House and the Senate, but we have a Democratic president. Every single year from 2001, the national debt is not only going up, it's going up as a percentage of gross domestic product. Every single year. Doesn't matter who's in. Do people remember the Wile E. Coyote fighting with the sheepdog cartoon? Do you remember that's what we have today? We effectively have the Wile E. Coyote going in and they punch in like a union clock. They fight all day. The whistle blows. One guy's about to take out Ross Kaminsky here, and then they stop and they punch out and they go home. That's our politics today. And we've got to do something radically different to change this. So, listen, the movie is just one prick point in doing this. But so basically, I hired a movie crew, and we traveled from Fort Collins, Colorado, where I live, and we travel about 6,000 to 7,000 miles across the country, mostly on back roads. Almost never, we get on the highway several times, we kind of have to, but mostly on back roads. And we talked to hundreds and hundreds of people along the way. And I was telling someone earlier today that I only wish I had another movie camera crew with me to make a movie about the movie camera crew that came with me. Because the movie crew that came with me were very agnostic, sort of left of center, didn't read the paper kind of people. That's who movie crews are kind of made up today, right? I don't know. Maybe it was random. Maybe it wasn't random, but I think that's kind of who's making movies today. You can see they don't know much about America, and they're traveling and their eyes are starting to open. And there's black people, and there's white people, and there's tall people, and there's short people, and there's fat people, and there's every type of person along the way on sides of roads. We're in Mississippi, we're in Youngstown, Ohio, we're in Oklahoma. And everybody is saying the same thing. Because I had this real simple thing, that if we could find a way to unite people to know that if we could solve this budget problem, this deficit problem, and our trade deficit, which is simply oil from countries that hate us in communist China, which is trying to become the world superpower, and we're letting them, and sort of like everybody knows that too. So their eyes are opening wide all along the way, and they're like, hey, Steve, hey, Mayor, when are we going to see people say something different? And I said, probably we get to Washington, D.C., And sure enough, we get to Washington, D.C., and people are saying different things, right? Because everything's fine in Washington, D.C. So that's really the movie. It's a heartfelt movie about how real people, regular folks that you don't see every day, that you'd be surprised by what they say. And it's not like me only putting into the movie what I think they should say. There's a guy, Larry Sugarboy Walker, for example. He sells handbags and sides of roads out of an old van that has like 20 dents in it. He's like probably 23, 24. And we just pull up in Stuttgart, Arkansas, where my wife's family is from. And we get out, and of course we get out in Stuttgart, Arkansas with movie crews. The whole town stops in these small towns. I mean, really, they're coming down. The mayor's trying to find us. And what are you guys doing here? And the cops are coming by. And this guy, like many other people, he's, sometimes they make these movies outside. You can't put people who say great things in them because a train went by or you just didn't get the right sound. This guy just still sits in his van and he's describing, like he's not into class warfare. It's not what you see in the paper or in the Fox News at night or MSNBC. He just is like, we got to cut this off at the bottom. We can't just take the branches out of this place. We got to go and take all the roots out and solve this problem. And everybody we meet is like willing to chip in. Like there's a lady named Viola. She's sitting in a chair. She's at a church group and they're selling warm pies and old clothes. And she's a single mother of two. And she works every day. She drives 50 miles to work into Memphis. We're on the east of Memphis, in a place that I lived in Memphis for 9 years. And she literally is describing the country in a very guttural way. And she says things in the movie that we put in that she's like, and don't no one tell me it wasn't going to fail, because we all know it was going to fail. And I'm like, if she knows it's going to fail, how does the head of the Federal Reserve Board not know it's going to fail? Right? Of course, he does. He just got out of office before it does. Both of them did. And so there's people like that. And she's talking about interest, right? She talks about interest like paying her bills and then throwing a check behind her and then watching it catch up to her with the rates rise. She's talking about America in this microcosm, and she gets it. And she's got nothing. I mean, she's not a wealthy lady. She's a poor lady and wanting to tell her kids to go to... So this American dream, which is dying in front of us, is still held by millions and millions of people. And one of the things that really you can see happening as I take these trips around the country, and I'm in my car a lot, is how many people now are demoralized. Like they don't think it can ever change. That's maybe the biggest problem we have. That the two-party system that we have in place today has demoralized people because we don't get what we want. I mean, raise your hand if you can remember the last time we had a great victory for freedom. Like we're all in this room. You guys, we could have disagreements about some issues, but pretty much people here like having individual rights, like carrying a gun or a concealed weapon, and pretty much, we want people to work who can work, right? I mean, simple things, right? When was the last time? I'm 53. I can't remember. I wake up in the morning and I see another story about the Middle East, and I want to take a gun and blow the TV's brains out. Like, since I was born, they keep talking about this one area of the world and nothing else. Meanwhile, communist China is putting platforms out in the South China Sea that are like 14 miles outside of where they're supposed to be, and they're like football fields long to land planes on eventually. Not a word. I mean, when George Soros, this is not to make fun of it, this is the way this campaign finance laws are going. And I'm not sure what we're supposed to do about it, but when George Soros has like $900 million, and the Koch brothers, God bless them, have another $500 million, and everybody in the room's got $65, most people say, what the hell am I going to do about this? Right? I saw this in Cranston, Rhode Island, in a microcosm. People were so depressed. I mean, when I say depressed, they thought the city was going to default. And people weren't going to be able to get mortgages. And the whole state was going to collapse. It was a giant issue. I mean, it's hard to imagine. The Denver Post of Rhode Island is called the Providence Journal. And they started putting on every article about Cranston financial crisis in red lines. Like Cranston East basketball beats Cranston West basketball. Cranston financial crisis. I'm joking. But that was sort of how seriously they took it. And people started to focus. And if I added anything to the discussion, was sort of giving people hope. Yeah, we can do this. We're going to fix this. And I had a campaign message, by the way, that was only one time you could win with a campaign message like this. I hadn't lived in Cranston in 20 years. I came back home, and I got on chairs, and I went and knocked on doors and in debates, and I basically said this: nobody will like anything I'm going to do, but vote for me, Steve Laffey. I didn't come all the way back home to live in Detroit. And I'm not going to live in Detroit. I said that, by the way, about Detroit. I used to say, in 2001, I was saying this, right? Detroit was obviously going broke. And then we kind of got people together. And there was one time, I just want to tell you this on a micro basis, but there was one time where I had to introduce my first budget. I kept saying, because we had to raise taxes we had 22%. We're out of whack by 22% in a city that 86% of what you did is under contract. Okay? And plus, the rest of it's like oil for the schools, right? And trucks that drive around. What are you going to do? So we raised taxes and we cut spending. I told people we're going to cut spending. And about 1,500 people showed up for a budget hearing. Imagine a city of 80,000 people where 1,500 people show up to a meeting. And that happened for about 6 months. We had 1,500 people in meetings where rooms that only held 800. We had no place bigger than 800. So people are in the aisles. The unions are there. And I said to myself, I want to make them watch me cut for like 40 minutes every line item in the city of Cranston. And I did. And I had it on these big giant board. And I went and I could see people, after a while, they were like, hey, this guy's not joking around. He doesn't have any friends. He took $600,000 out of the senior center, which is we have like the oldest population in Rhode Island that anybody's ever seen, right? And so no more square dancing, right? Just boom, 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 boom. All the way down. Like I'm not paying the electric bill for 30 grand. And then they get down to like $600. And then I fired these crossing guards. And all of a sudden people are cheering. And you know why they're cheering? I have a video of this thing. It's like people are cheering. They're screaming. I'm raising their taxes. I'm cutting all the spending. And you know why they're cheering? Because finally it's freaking fair. Like finally it's fair for everybody. Finally it's not Joe's buddies not getting the job. Everybody's getting fired. No more, on a macrocosm, be like, no more ethanol for the Iowa farmers, even though when you go there to run for president, you got to say you like ethanol. No more something for the sugar producers. No more nothing for everybody. Social Security is radically changed, and I don't care if you're 63 and about to get it. I don't know how old you are, ma'am. I'm sorry. But I didn't mean to point right at you. I'm sorry. You're considerably younger than 63. But that's what we need in America today. We don't need people getting up who have no idea what they're talking about, change their opinion, but need to tell people it's going to be rough. Because America doesn't have an $18 trillion deficit, right? Budget. It's got like a $211 trillion problem. I mean, take Social Security, for example. Social Security is, first of all, it's never been accounted for right. All that money that was supposed to go into a lockbox should have been put into assets rather than just put into the budget. Always was. We have very few young people. I'm the one having all the children. Nobody else is. Right? And we just can't afford to do what we're doing. It's $32 trillion. Trillion with a T. That's 32 with 12 zeros. I mean, people don't even, we stop. When I was growing up, we might mention billions, right? Now we talk about trillions, and nobody can conceive what $1 trillion is. I'll give you an example. It's in the movie, but it's the one we kind of thought of and put into the movie. But if you went into business the day Jesus Christ was born and lost $1 million every single day, you still would not have lost $1 trillion today. It'd be 2734 when you lost $1 trillion. So down here in Denver, we got politicians of both stripes who are trying to fix this VA problem, right? The Veterans Administration building. It was $350 million. Now it's $1.7 billion. And nobody loses their job. Nobody loses their job. In fact, we saw Republican and Democratic congressmen, all fine chaps, I'm sure, have nice families, good children, all walking around like, we're going to fix this now. We're going to fix this now. Ross, the private sector, can you imagine? Seriously, if I show up at Morgan Keegan and said, I know I ran the trade desk for 5 years and we lost money every single day, Alan Morgan, who was the CEO and founder of Morgan Keegan, but I'm going to get it straight tomorrow. I wouldn't be there 5 years. I wouldn't be there 5 days. And yet the press allows people who sit on Veterans Administration committees, who don't pay any attention, I guess, to continue down this road, when the answer for the Veterans Administration is so simple. Listen, in life, most things that are better are more expensive, right? When I was a kid, we never got Fig Newtons. We were poor. We got fig bars from the day-old store. Fig bars. And they're terrible. Fig bars are terrible. Right? I don't know. They were terrible. But they were cheaper, a lot cheaper. So better, like a Mercedes-Benz, I guess it's better. I drive Fords, but it's better. And than a Ford, I suppose. They're more expensive. But in this case, If we just simply said to our veterans, thank you so much for serving. There's no way we're sending you to these lousy hospitals anymore. Here's my Anthem Blue Cross card with my $10,000 deductible. I'm going to pay the deductible. We, the taxpayers, are happy to pay, especially if you fought in Fallujah and you're in a theater of war, okay? And whether you got hurt or not, we're going to pay that for the rest of your life. Here, you get in front of Steve Laffey at every line. There's a little star on your card, and you get the best service. Instead, every year, like, by the way, every 6 years, like hula hoops, right? Hula hoops come back for a while. The Veterans Administration comes back. It's underfunded. People are dying. It takes 6 months to hire a nurse. They don't get the right people. They can't get people into the private sector. They just gave them $17 billion last year, and almost nobody gets out to the right hospital to this very day. And people are still dying. In a building, one building's $1.4 billion over cost. One building. If you've ever been in addition on your home, you know what does it take to have that much cost overruns, right? You need a wife that really wants to change things every minute, right? I just we did the kitchen, honey, and I don't like that kitchen. Oh, back to the drawing board. I'm not sure these people are not even engineers. So there's a simple solution. Why don't we get that solution? Why don't we get the solution of cheaper and better for our veterans? The Veterans Administration will be $160 billion. And I don't even have to do, that's how much we're going to spend this year. I don't even have to do the calculation this year to say it's cheaper and better. It's obviously cheaper and better. And by the way, all the veterans hospitals, many of them look terrible, can compete. They can compete for the business. No one will do it because both parties want power, and they will not give up power until we make them give up power. And we, the people, have let all of these elected officials on both sides who have run up our debt to the point where it's going to be a tremendous, tremendous disaster for this country. We've let them do that, and we've given away our power, and we've got to get it back. So there's, particularly one solution. There's the Veterans Administration. But there's lots of easy solutions that need to be done in this country before it's too late. And one of the reasons I made, by the way, am I running out of time? You can tell me. I don't have a clock. Yeah, if you want to. Well, if this is, these are the types of things that have to happen. And so I've spent a lot, listen, and I'll just tell you, I've spent like 13 years of my life. I gave up, running a company and went to try to do this. And we homeschool our children and so forth. And everything's been wonderful. But thank you. Yeah. And the kids are great. And I've been graced to be able to do this, but we're really near the end. And that's why I think it's so important that we talk about it in those terms to our elected officials and to everybody we see. A lot of people aren't paying attention out there in America. And it's going to be a real problem when they do. For example, I was just reading I'm one of those guys that reads like the federal budget on the way down to give a speech. And so I'm looking at these line items. And it's one of the things that's really hard to get across to people is that, one, not only do we have $18 trillion in debt, it's just that rates are so low now because of the Federal Reserve, by the way, which has screwed all the people who are trying to save. I mean, everybody was making 3% on cash, which is sort of, the normal thing that you would make on CDs and so forth. Now they make zero. They basically decided to take that $10 trillion of cash that people had lying around and make $300 billion on that we made, right? And give it to large banks. That's where it goes. These banks have failed. They wouldn't let them go out of business. They wouldn't let their stocks go to zero. They had to make sure the CEOs kept getting, I don't want to sound like Elizabeth Warren here, but they had to make sure the CEOs kept getting their bonuses. That's who they're in bed with, Goldman Sachs and so forth. And so that's where we stand. We stand like 6 years later with a stagnant economy, and yet another budget that talks about, for example, we pay about $220 billion in interest on our debt this year. And on a country that takes in $3.3 trillion and spends $3.9 trillion this year, people will look at that line item and say, yeah, all right. The problem is, what if rates went to normal? You just ask yourself, and then by the way, what's normal? American government, we have 1 month, bills, and we all the way to 30-year treasury bonds. And so there's two things about that number. One is, on average, we've borrowed at about 6% over the last 30 years. So as a business guy, I'm always saying, we're probably going to borrow at 6%. So pretty soon we'll be at $20 trillion in debt. And to make the numbers easy, because we don't borrow all of that money, what's 20 trillion times 0.05? 5%. Well, it's $1 trillion in interest. So where does the $750 billion extra come from? There's no more blood to get out of the stone. It doesn't come. That's the end game. Whether you think it's inflation or deflation, I don't even know. That is the end game. The Federal Reserve knows it. I know it. Most people know it. And yet, in this great republic that has done so many great things, we plod along to disaster. We are going to be known as the worst generation that ever lived for our children. I mean, they're getting out of college. There aren't effective jobs for them. Our manufacturing, people know our manufacturing is so gone. Our manufacturing base of this country is so gone that when the Golden Gate Bridge had to be rebuilt, we didn't have a fabricating unit big enough in America. It all came in from communist China. And so if someone blows up a bridge, let's heaven forbid, what do? Who do we call? We call communist China. They probably blew up the bridge. We're not going to be calling them. So this is America today, and yet we're left with, look who we've elected. Look who's running for president. I mean, look at this. Go to a website of, I don't know who you people like. I'm not trying to insult people who might be great, but just go to Marco Rubio's website. Go marcorubio.com when you get home. Yeah. There's nothing there. There's really nothing there to talk about. There's there's like something about the Veterans Administration, something about how we grew up, something. It's sad that this is where we've come to. Where is Eisenhower when we need him? Or someone who has a stature, someone who's really done something, someone who really understands how to put this back together. It's lacking. It's one of the reasons it's lacking, in my opinion, would be term limits. Another easy thing. Some people would say, in this room, say, oh, yeah, no, people should be elected for as long as they want. So I used to think that before I became the mayor. And being the little old mayor, I'll tell you, I have this in my notepad. I always have these yellow notepads. And people know I have these little checklists, even for the day. I check things off. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to eat some lettuce, whatever I'm going to do that day. But usually I have these tasks that have to be done. I made up a task for Cranston, Rhode Island. I wasn't going to leave until the bond rating was investment grade. By the way, went up 8 notches in 3.5 years. Never happened in the history of America. Any city, any state, history of America, Cranston's bond rating up 8 notches. If you know anything about bond ratings, they move like glaciers, right? Like real glaciers, not the ones they say are melting all day long. But I mean, they move very slowly. And so the budget surplus had to be X, and it was up to $20 million. Boom, but there's like 5 things. We want to build a new police station. We were starting to build it. I sat with my advisors, great friends, guys from first grade, and my high school teacher who stopped his life to be my campaign manager, and Tom Marcel, my college roommate. I said, well, I'm done. This is great. I'm not going to run for re-election. And everybody in the room was like, no, wait. You got to keep running. Because then you can run 2 more times, then the governor who won't be the governor anymore, he'll be term limited out, and you'll do this and you'll do that. I'm like, no, I just told people I'd stick around till these things were done. And I'm done. And I was done. I was going to do something else. But even at that level, people get into a system where they kind of like it that way. And with term limits, another easy thing that 70-some-odd% of the Americans want, which we don't have, is think about it. 70% of Americans want something that seems to be pretty obvious. And we don't have it. And we're not getting it. And no one runs for president's talking about it. And it's not going to happen. Right? It's not going to happen. So it's hard to imagine that we live in a country where the things that we could agree upon, forget about the things that we disagree upon, right? Abortion, gay marriage, all these things that's the only 2 issues I think in the news today, right? And then smoking pot. In fact, that was the only news I think in the Colorado newspaper today. Smoking pot, gay marriage, and maybe it had to be something about abortion in that paper. So that's what it was. But that's not what people really talk about. That's what people of common sense know. They know darn well the budget should be balanced every year. That the president should introduce a balanced budget every year and let the chips fall where they may. And go around the country on a train or a plane and say, this is why it should be balanced. People know that. And they know we should have term limits, and that anybody who serves in Congress or the Senate or the president or their staff members should sign a piece of paper, not the one Hillary Clinton didn't sign, but a real piece of paper that says they will never be lobbyists. And guess what? We would have people like you running for office. We'd have real people saying, you know what? I'm going to really come off my farm. I'm going to stop my life as a mayor. I'm going to go help out for a couple of years. And people don't. Most of my friends, especially my Harvard Business School buddies who really helped me out. I mean, I love them all. And they're great mentors to me. I was the youngest one there, and these guys are a little bit older. They've always been great help to me, and they'll always write a check no matter what I want to do. They're just amazing people. But most of them have really checked out like, Steve, I don't know why you do this, but it ain't going to change. Whatever you want to do, I'm in, but I ain't ever doing it. And I got friends who should be president. Guys who started big companies, who really know what they're doing, are highly ethical, who can grasp many situations at once, who know how to hire and fire thousands of people. And they're never, ever, ever running for office because of the system that's in place today. They won't put up with it. I put up with a lot. I got pretty thick skin and I have a really quirk. Nothing really bothers me. You yell at me and I went, whatever. And I'll tell you one last story about Cranston, how these things turn out. I think it could turn out for the nation one day because we're going to have this real crisis. And the critical thing is that people like you, if not in office, somewhere when this real crisis hits, that we at least can make a lurch, I don't want to say a lurch to the right, but we keep having this dribble to more control over our lives and higher taxes and more control. We need to get back quickly before we lose this country. But it's a day before I'm running for re-election. Now remember, I'm in the most liberal state, the state where Barack Obama in 2012 got the highest percentage of vote of any state, that in Vermont. And I'm a Republican, and I talk just like I'm talking to you now. I haven't changed my opinion on just about anything. And I'm running down the street. My campaign manager, who's my high school economics teacher, who gave me the book Free to Choose, and we watched it imagine that. I actually watched the TV show in 1979, 1980 in that economics class, and it set me on a road that was just really positive. In my office, I keep the one letter I have from Milton Friedman, who I wanted to come to Bowdoin College and speak, but he said the marginal utility of his time was, he did, I swear to God. He was getting older, and he's basically saying, no way, Steve, I'm not coming. But I kept it. So I'm going down the street, and this is another microcosm of America, and a lady down there, my Paul's assistant says to me, Steve, Mayor, this lady wants to speak to you. So imagine me running up to the car, and the lady rolls down her window, and I say, hey, hello, and the election's the next day, and she goes, I hate you. And I go, well, yeah, I've heard that before. Thank you, ma'am. She goes, oh, I'm voting for you tomorrow. But I didn't like it. I had to put 10 gallons of cod liver oil down everybody's throat, right? And I said, no, I didn't like it either. I'd rather just kiss babies too. But anyway, she drove off and I got 65% of the vote, right? And after really, really telling people how bad it was, what had to happen, and doing what had to happen, doing what had to be done, and taking the attitude that, listen, I don't mean to say it this way. It was just the lowest paid job that I ever had, except for like scraping pans at a bakery when I was 16. But since I got out of business school, it wasn't like I had to do this. And yet the country now has people running, and that's all they do. That's all they've done. That's all they do. That's all they're ever going to do. They're going to run for an office from the age of 22 or get out of college and work for a staffer in Congress, marry someone who's related to somebody, blah, 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 or just be really famous. I mean, we may be down to Clinton and Bush. I think we will be, by the way. The odds would be that way. And it's really going to be, do you want an aristocracy? Is that what we came here to do?
Aren't you already off right there by saying that it will be nothing but we expect to be?
No, I mean,
it aggregates such high hopes. You just cut it off.
Well, if we don't do something radically different, whether it's another party, whether it's just really rising up. Listen, I'd like to get into my pickup truck. If I thought people would just pay attention, if I could get on 400 radio stations like yours and say, there's a guy named Laffey, he's in Sacramento today. He's taking a 2-week jaunt to Washington. Everybody get in your pickup trucks and your cars. Let's just go down there and not leave until we get one thing. By the way, I don't care what it is, because one of the problems is everybody's got their own thing. I mean, I know I got mine. It's national debt. I live for balancing budgets. I mean, I can't stand when they're out of budget. When I was at Morgan Keegan, I didn't just balance the budgets. I balanced every line item in every budget. So when we had a line item, $36,000 a year for pens and pencils. I know it sounds like a lot, but it was a pretty big firm. And so I told my secretary, that means that's $3,000 a month. So at the end of the month, if you spent more than $3,000, don't spend any more than that. And sure enough, she would have spent $3,000, and one of our $1 million producers would say, I need some pens or pencils or paper. And she'd say, go to Walgreens. And he'd be like, what are you talking about? Well, Laffey says that's it. I'm done. I already spent $3,000. Come back in 4 days. We never had a deficit in any of my line items. So I don't mean to depress you, but that is the truth about where we're heading. And what I'd like to do is find a way to not head there. That's why I'm here. I'm not here for.
You made it so terrifically black and white. That's the only problem I have with that.
Yeah.
The fact that you made it either Hillary or Joe.
I mean,
and that's a little bit too black and white for me.
Yeah, and it may be too black and white, but as we sit here today,
I feel like y'all are all Republican registered. How would that?
You'd be wrong.
No, I think it's probably wrong. But in this,
so I want to get a raise of hands.
We'll get to Q&A in just a couple minutes.
Why don't we just? I mean,
let's let Steve finish.
I'll just finish up. I'll just finish by saying that I hope it's not that. I just, I read the tea leaves. I've been attacked by these people when they move. No, you didn't cut me off, sir. It's fine. It's totally fine. I like the interaction. When they moved the primary system up, all the southern states up to like March 1st or whatever from other dates, they're only doing that for one reason. There's only one group of people that can organize that many people that quickly. Their name is Bush, associated with Romney. No one else has the organization to be able to organize that many people in this big of a country over that period of time. It's the way it is. So I wish it wasn't. I think it'll produce a very low, if that would have happened, I think you'll see more people demoralized. Listen, one of the biggest things I see going through the country, and it makes me so sad because I grew up with literally nothing, and I was able to make something of myself, right? And I always had this hope that I was going to do it. And it didn't come from within my family, but it came from the teachers. It came from the people across the street. So I always had this. And so I've always lived by everybody's going to have more than their parents. I mean, I don't, people call it the American dream, whatever they call it, but it really is inside me that my kids have to do better. And I'm always on them about it. There's so many demoralized, it is the number one problem. There's so many demoralized people that think it will never change, that it might not change. And I'm not one of them. I'm still here. I'm here tonight. So we've got to find a way to change it. And that, I just I appreciate your time. I hope you do go home and watch the movie. I think you really enjoy it. And it's played in a lot of different places. And I've been keynote speakers at different places down in Texas and all around. But it's a great pleasure to be with you all tonight. And I'm happy to take any of your questions or comments on other things we got to fix and so forth. Ross, go ahead.